Good morning, everyone. Sorry to break this wonderful conversation here. Uh, but I'd like to get us started on time so we could stay on time. And how is it going? How are we doing after 2 days of R.I.S.E here? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And we realized it was rainy and cloudy yesterday morning. As you see, we act to your concerns and we have fixed it for today. It takes us a lot of work uh, to make sure that the sun's shining bright every day. So, but thank you again for joining us. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today as it sort of picks on what the things that we have seen, heard, talked to each other about over the last couple of days at intersection of AI on rise and deployments and use cases, and the two friends and amazing scholars that I'll be having a conversation today with. We sort of touch upon all the topics. But one thing I'd like to also highlight is yesterday, I'm not sure how many of you attended a poster session of the students. Wasn't that amazing? I mean, these students are doing, so just give them a huge round of applause, are doing some amazing, amazing work. So I'd like to first welcome Father Paolo Benanti up on the stage here. He's a third order regular Franciscan and leading ethicist of technology. Father Benanti focuses his work on the ethical and anthropological significance of the digital age. He's a professor of ethics professor of ethics of AI at Lewis University. It's a very interesting university. He was sharing with me yesterday or a day ago that they educate the next the business leaders of tomorrow. So imagine if you're in a classroom and being educated by the man himself, right? You would be hire business leaders from Lewis and Notre Dame. We create great business leaders, by the way. The Vatican, and he's also the Vatican consultant on AI and the president of Italian Government Commission on the Impact of AI on Media and Journalism. His counsel is sought at the highest levels of global policy. He was recently appointed by the UN Secretary General Guterres to the group developing a proposal for the global governance of AI. And he was also appointed by President Biden to the National Science Board. And just to share with you a small world effect, yesterday Father Benanti was sharing with me that he was he was asked to be on a phone call with the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. And they were talking, and Father Benanti said, I was in South Bend with Natesh, we were having dinner at this restaurant. And the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See said, that's my favorite restaurant in South Bend. Who was the U.S. ambassador to the Holy See? Any guesses? Joe Donnelly from Indiana. So it's a small world effect that sort of comes together here. And then joining him is Professor Aarti Singh, who's a distinguished professor in the machine learning department at Carnegie Mellon University. That's the #1 department in AI. And also the director of the NSF AI Institute for Societal Decision Making. So you can see why we have these two amazing, brilliant minds together on the stage to talk about AI ethics and how we think about societal decision-making using AI. And folks who are not familiar with these NSF institutes, these are the most competitive research AI institutes to be awarded by NSF. These are about a $20 million research grant that we received from NSF, and Aarti is leading one of those at the Societal Decision-Making at CMU. And she's a recognized expert at the intersection of machine learning, statistics, and signal processing. Her own research has focused on designing principled interactive algorithms with real-world application to scientific and societal domains. And I don't know, Aarti, how you're going to find time, but she's also the general chair of ICML 2025 and a lead expert on multiple NAS study committees. So please join me in welcoming Father Benanti and Aarti. All right, I'm going to grab a seat next to you and carry on the conversation. It's already there. So this is how we'll do. So we will maybe talk to each other and everyone else here for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we will invite all of you to join in the conversation. And we will be constrained by time, so the way to get your question out, first one to the mic wins, right? So we'll follow, for the computer scientists in the room, we'll follow first in, first out strategy, FIFO, right? We won't be doing LIFO here today. last in, first out. All right, so I'll start with you, Father Benanti. As you, a lot of your work, even last time when you visited us here at Notre Dame, you gave a fascinating talk at the Lucy Society series on algorithmics. And as we start thinking about an AI for good is becoming a thing, right? Folks keep, it's used correctly or incorrectly, I don't know yet. But I'd love to get your perspective on what does it mean that it's AI for good once it's deployed? Like what principles of human dignity must be upheld from that perspective? What is AI for good in your perspective?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, let's start from a perspective. Should we talk about ethics in technology? Because, when for the first time 60,000 years ago, a human being take for the first time in his hand a clapstick, it could be a tool to open much more coconuts or a weapon to open much more skull. So is it an ethics in technology or should be an ethics in the human being that is using technology? Mm-hmm. Well, this is a long topic. Just to arrive to an understanding that we have today. We understood that it's not just a matter of using technology in a way or in another way, but once a technology is released inside a society, it acts as a form of order and displacement of power. So supposing that we have to build a railway, where we put the track and where we put the station is something that is beside the good or bad of the railways, is allowing someone to get transportation and is denying someone else to get the transportation. So it's not just a matter of being good or bad of the railways. There is an effect in society that is connected to different stakeholders that has to be analyzed, has to be put in the middle, has to be in some way negotiated in society. Well, now it's not anymore time in which such kind of effect is produced by concrete, steel, and other technology. But every time that we wrote a conditional form in an algorithm, if this then that, or we allow a machine learning to determine something like that, we are giving a form of order and a dimension of power inside the society. AI for good is the form of such kind of innovation that take care of the different stakeholders in society that will be touched by such kind of technology. And this is a step on in the direction of complexity. I heard yesterday a lot of super interesting discussion, and it happened that we have to distinguish between the developer and deployer, because these things is something that happened between the developer and deployer. Let me do an example. You can develop an API call for an imaging recognition system. If we apply, let me do a really Italian example, to the recognition of a coffee bean in a roastery to understand if the coffee bean is good. The other example is with pasta and pizza, but I jump it. Well, sorry, I'm a professor. It's a meta-didactical things. If you smile, I don't lose you. Well, if we apply to such kind of things, there are no ethical problem. But if we apply the same API to the patient in an emergency room in an hospital, well, the form of order and the displacement of power touch the human dignity. And so here is where AI for good happen. It's not to say if AI is good or bad. It's not a medieval things, you smell devil of angels here, but it is a constant questioning technology in the societal appliance that is not like drop and forget, but is an ongoing recursive process that simply drive the technology to express the majority of the principles that we agree and the majority, to respect the majority of human rights that we decided to put at the center of what we call development, human development. Not only innovation, but human development. And so, to make short a long story, AI for good is the element that transforms innovation in human development.
Thank you so much for that, Father Benanti. So I'm picking on that. Aarti, your institute focuses on societal decision-making and has made some significant inroads in crisis management. So let's pick on where Father Benanti left us, that AI for good leads to integral human development. And when you're doing crisis management, you're leading to human development and human maintenance, so to speak. So tell us a bit about some of your projects and work and how it may tie in with what Father Benanti just laid for us.
Right. So good morning, everyone. Hope this is working. Everybody can hear me? Okay. So yeah, I totally agree with a lot of the things that were said, that developing AI for social good, we are doing it in the context of disaster management, really requires, I would say, developer and deployer together working with the stakeholders throughout the entire pipeline. We did not just develop, we don't develop tools or even come up with projects on our own as AI researchers and then go and try to convince some disaster managers to oh, this is a useful tool that you should use. Yes, many times they are unaware of what the potential could be, but that potential has to be co-discovered. So we start by we work with several state emergency management departments, also organizations like American Red Cross, to really identify, first just conduct a need finding study, right? Is AI the right tool? Where can AI be plugged in, right? What is the data that we will have access to? How it's sweated? What are the algorithms, the assumptions that go into it? And then try to develop something that identify first a problem setting and then develop algorithms with continual feedback from them. So I'll give you an example of that. We recently developed a method, an AI model to do building damage assessment, okay, after a hurricane, let's say. And this was built off of drone data. Now, the great thing about drones is that you can send them when it may still be unsafe for human, emergency responders to go out there, so you can collect that data very early. A big challenge is to look through that several minutes or hours of, in fact, videos and comb through for relevant information. Humans can do it, and they still do it. We are not replacing that part, but it takes them a lot of time. And developing an AI method, even if it is crude and can give them some sense of where there's most damage, helps them to decide on follow-up actions. Okay, so again, the actions are decided by the humans, the emergency managers, but the tool just gives them early access to information that otherwise they would be working in the blind for. So that's an example where we were able to release one of the largest hurricane-related disaster data sets, combining 10 different hurricanes. A key challenge for AI was annotation. It was never annotated. So we got it annotated through a citizen science effort and were able to develop these methods. They're not deployed fully yet. We did a tabletop exercise in April, again with emergency managers, to understand how, where it can be used, what are the pitfalls, how they would like to see the information, and then getting that feedback, which was actually more positive than we thought. We then are conducting training sessions with them. We have trained, I think, 2 subsequent rounds, about 100 disaster managers on using this tool. So that's just an example.
No, thank you, Aarti. So first of all, I really like your point about the developers and deployers working with stakeholders. It also gets to what Father Benanti was talking about, that what is AI for good, right? And something which I even shared, I've been thinking about deeply, is that we even think about responsible AI for good. There is no mathematical function for responsibility that you can give to a machine learning algorithm and to do a gradient loss, gradient descent, and figure out, do your loss optimization. So it is the developer deployer continuum that both of you have alluded to. So I agree. So I'll ask you a question. Let's assume, this is a question for both of you, you're in a disaster management scenario. And generally, the humans are, as you both have talked about, as the decision makers. But let's say that decision needs that fraction of a second timing, that you may not have the time for a human to look at the data, unless the system is trusted or not trusted. You can decide whatever attributes you want for the system. What should one do? Should we still wait for the human? Or when can we let the machine decide? Or should the human always override a machine's decision?
Well, the easy one to me, huh? Okay. Well, let me make it a little bit more complicated. My background is in engineers, so I think the problem is the 99% error-free threshold. We can imagine, especially now with LLM and generative artificial intelligence, that we are used to divide a task in a series of steps. And the problem is, how many steps can a machine take before we have a threshold of error below the 99%? Because if we have a 50% threshold, with 100 steps, it's like to flip a coin, you know? It could be good and could be bad. Also, if we have 80 or 90, 1 on 10, you need human supervision. And if this is the threshold and you need human supervision, the time has to be a human-compatible time that allows the human supervision to be a significant expression in the chain. But now we have model that can guarantee 2,000 probably steps with 99% of error-free threshold. Probably the one is the Claude models for Anthropic that can guarantee 33 hours of coding without a lot of problem. And this is a lot. This is a lot. Now, the problem is, in this transitional time, in which every 7 months we see this number of steps rise up, we can imagine to put in place with this threshold of precautionary principle, much more kind of different tasks that the machine can make in an autonomous way. What does it mean, precautionary things? Something that my father, that is an engineer too, will tell to me, think twice, cut once. This is the things. But because we have this kind of technology, and because this kind of technology can shorten the time of intervention in mission-critical things like in a disaster, well, we should start to, let me express in that way, to draft a coexistence map in which some kind of task could be automated with such level of threshold. Other tasks need to be put in place with human supervision, and we have to give time to people to be the responsible in that action, and some kind of task has to remain to the human things. We have a lot of examples in which, you know, we don't respect the human time in a human-machine decision-making model. There was a moment in which we start to develop autonomous driving car, and if there is an uncertainty, they call the driver to take an action. Yeah. But if you make in 1 second and 50 and you are watching Netflix on the car, well, don't let me use a bad word, but it's not really, you know, it's not really. And this is the point. So we are assisting to the rising of a new, probably also discipline, that is this crossing intersection area between human and machine. And if I can express it like a philosopher, like I am a philosopher and my topic is moral philosophy, I think that today the people that are simple designing the user experience are the ones that are shaping the most political fact in our society. Because this is where you are drafting what remains of humanity as a source of meaning in decision. And I think that in critical area, like disaster recovery, is where, because humanity is at the center. You would like to make a recovery not to save goods, but to save peoples. It's where we can draft a for good user experience and user interface that can serve as a gold standard model for a lot of other business. This is why it's so important, the example that you make. Because where is the nude human, the core element that you face, is where you can say loudly, what do you think is the value of the human beings and the human being decision-making system?
Yeah, so one point that I'll disagree, but the rest I agree.
Well,
that's what we want. Our goal is to get them to a point of disagreement. Right? And then we'll ask for forgiveness from Father Benanti.
Yes, absolutely. So I think the point that I disagree slightly is that I tend to think of it as baselines are important to consider. How are things being done currently? And so I would not just shoot for always that like 99% accuracy. That's, I think, a counterproductive goal. I think we have to think about how it's done currently and do actually a counterfactual analysis to see how would the AI or the human working with the AI do, right? Or maybe just AI in some scenarios where it makes sense. But you have to evaluate that counterfactual according to range of criteria, which include ethics, accountability, right, privacy, all of the things, in addition to, of course, accuracy and the beneficence of it. So I would say that actually studying when, there is no one recipe, first of all, right? Like when you should just defer to the humans, when you should defer to AI, and so on. I think it's very context dependent, and developing such a framework where you can understand what human-AI complementarity looks like in a particular domain, given the risks of that domain, given the several considerations, is actually a really important open question that we are trying to address by asking the following question. We want to develop a prescriptive framework for AI adoption. Can I prescribe the way you use AI in a particular, given the parameters of a context, that can situate it for better outcomes, right? Or adoption actually is one of the things that we are looking at. So to me, this means you list out what are the user factors, right? Things like privacy, accountability, where the decision maker will be held responsible. You list out the organizational factors, and I'm not listing all of them, just examples, legality, operationalizability, and so on. And you list out societal factors like ethics, right, morality, and so on. And then think about how you can mediate the effect of those factors on AI adoption by the right use case, the way the human engages with the AI. As an example, a radiologist could always defer to AI. That's clearly a bad choice, we all know. But if it uses AI when it's not confident and when it's declaring a not cancer, so asymmetric triaging, not when it's saying a cancer, right? But if the human thinks, this is probably not a cancer, but I'm not sure, that's a good point to use AI, actually, because you only can hopefully detect a potential cancer, right, but not miss out on one. So there are particular ways of engaging with it that in different contexts may make sense, and identifying those is the key.
Thank you. So this is great, right? So I don't think you all are generally in agreement. So we still have to double click on it. I want us to get to a stage of where we are. So we have, and I agree. So I think what it comes down to is, can we explain the why, right? And I think there are two principles to it. Aarti, as a computer scientist, you think about the human-machine interfaces and how we are. Can we the notions of explainability? Can we explain what's going on? Can the human understand what's going on, perhaps or perhaps not? What are the different factors? Whether you both talked about accountability, right? Moral accountability as well, and the societal intervention factors or accuracy, etc. Clearly, accuracy has to be put aside. Right? Yesterday, Luna from Meta gave an amazing keynote where she talked about the notion of factuality, where if you just look at the accuracy, some LLMs look good, but you look at the rate of hallucinations at the same time, they don't look that good, and if you put that together. So accuracy is a misnomer in many ways in these situations. So if we were to design the system, and Father Benanti, you said you were an engineer, philosopher, Franciscan, so
a lot of sin. Yes.
So what does moral accountability look like? If you were to say that the systems that we computer scientists are deploying, and if you can say, okay, this is one idea of moral accountability that will transcend, faiths and everything, that we go, okay, yes, this is something that we should have in a system.
Well, we are talking about a technology that it's really near to a general purpose technology. So it's not so easy to identify a global model without applying to the different sector. Because if we talk about healthcare, it's something. If we talk about the mechanical production of steel, is another things. But when we talk about accountability, we talk about the fact that at the end of the day, there is someone, and what this someone could be also a company, that take the responsibility for the series of action that was put in place by the system. We can say that accountability from the perspective that we are talking about is a promise enforced by the law. And the promise is, I take care of this, and I take the responsibility for this. Well, the real thing is, there are three different lines of action on this, and there is not still one model that win and the other that lose. There is one line of action that say that only if there is a direct responsibility of the developer on the function, that could be a really accountability. But this is struggling with a lot of systems in which the complexity is so high, in which you have a really transformation of the deploying during the deploying system of the model that you are putting in place. And this is happening, for example, in all the digital transformation of a lot of business. You can apply a really interesting algorithms in a healthcare system, and then you see that the quality of the outcome is really different, not for the system that you are deploying, but for the nature of the object that is the human beings. And I have a long, long talk last month in Seattle with neurosurgery. And the problem of neurosurgery, especially the one in an endoscopy, is that there is someone that has to adapt the theoretical displacement of the brain with the actual position of the brain that the system is discovering when you are making the surgery. Well, where is the accountability here? Could be in the system, could be in the system plus the doctor. It is so much critical and context depending that probably cannot be the same model of applying it in a production line of something in which you define all the system that has to happen. Because if you apply in an industry, you define the production line. And because you've defined the production line, you know the guardrail and you know the standard. When you touch the unpredictability, usually we have the accountability that remain to the human beings for the really impossibility of having an abstraction of what the real situation is. When you give a gun to an officer, there is something that remains in the personal judgment of the officer in that kind of situation of risk. And so probably here the discussion on accountability is different. There is a third model that comes, especially out from China and other kind of government, that come not from a non-directly Western model, in which is the harmony of the whole that is much important of the right of the single, of the individual. In that system, you look at the global number. If before you have 97% of success globally, and now you are able to go to 98, okay, it's workable for accountability. I don't think there is one that fits all, and we need to make something, and the disagreement of before is the sign of this, in which there is an interdisciplinary committee with different voice and different perspective that is able to say this is a workable threshold of accountability, in which there are clear these kind of things. Would you like to produce a model that then the deployer can change in deploying it? I don't think you want that. This is easy for academia because we stay higher, but when you deploy, a lot of things happen. Well, the real things that is missing here is the model, is a way to involve the deployer in this accountability stuff.
I totally agree. However, we are imposing this notion of a high order of moral accountability, right, on machines. And yet at the same time, we don't have a compact between us humans about a higher purpose or higher moral accountability. But we are saying the machines must. So imagine a world where humans and machines are coexisting. Could we at least have a pact between humans and machines, and machine to machine, about some idea of a moral accountability? And yes, we do humor ourselves about the hallucinations of LLMs, but that makes me think about a quote of Margaret Mead, what she said. Margaret Mead, a noted anthropologist, what people say, what people do, and what people say they do are entirely different things. What she's saying is we all hallucinate, right? So how do we sort of bridge that gap that are we putting machines at a higher expectation than what we're putting each other?
Well, this is really cultural, I can accept that the doctor make what is possible, and then the exit is not positive. I will not accept to go in on a machine treatment if there is something like that. But this is a cultural stuff. The core question that you are raising is, could we have a universal ethics? This is the problem. Yes. Well, I'm a scholar of the Jesuits. Always answer to a question with another question. What does it mean with I can say this here because there are no Jesuits around. Well, in which way we define ethics? Well, if you understand ethics as a value, well, let me tell you a secret. I'm a Catholic. And as a Catholic, I think that marriage is a high value, but I'm not married. So also among a singular group like Catholics, value are connected to individual choices. So we cannot universalize value. It's not workable, dot. Can we universalize moral norms? Well, a moral norms is an attempt to protect a value. And if value are variable, well, moral norm at least will know some kind of exception in some situation. There is a long debate on legitimate defense and things like that. So should we surrender to that? Well, there is a third element in ethics that we call principle. So supposing that we are in an autonomous driving car, make it sense that in the unavoidable situation of an accident, the car try to minimize the damages. Well, if you are someone that work on the street, if you are the owners of the car, if you are in another car, yes, it makes sense. Welcome to principle. Well, if we focus on principle as a practical way to solve conflict, we can define a set of principles that are universal, that can underline to this discussion of accountability, in which if the machine is not minimizing the damages, someone will be accountable. If the machine, and it happened in autonomous satellite around the Earth, you know, the most valuable thing on satellite is the payload. And the propellant, it's payload. So we have an autonomous system. I was in a huge conference, global conference in Paris a couple of years ago, in which, you know, before when we have NASA and ESA, they make a phone call and say, we have in a collision orbit. Okay, this is my turn, I shift the orbit. I use the payload. This is your turn, you shift the orbit. Now that you have a lot of private players, they try to call him and they don't answer. They try to send it on a mail and they don't answer. No one would like to pay the payload for that. In that case, there is another principle. Make my own business, my own advantage. So this idea of principle and this idea of having a minimum set of workable principle, I think is the entrance door for the accountability.
Thank you so much, Father Benanti. You set me up wonderfully for the question to Aarti now. So, Aarti, you've done human factors research, ML research, and let's say that we form an interdisciplinary committee. And let's say the three of us are part of that interdisciplinary committee. And we come up with, informed by Father Benanti, a set of principles. Could we incorporate those set of, where are we in terms of our own technology, whether in algorithm, human factors, or interfaces, that we could flex and create and deploy these, build and deploy these systems that will be true to those set of principles, and we can measure them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And that's why I think I take the easy route, which is I always compare, as I said, like against what's the baseline. What are the humans doing, as you're saying, right? If the human is the baseline and they have those biases, we need to compare against that, whether those will be improved. So suppose we did, and that's why I try like not to, I mean, in my personal life I do, but like in the development, like not think so much about like global morals, because I think that's a bigger question, or principles. But let's say we agree upon some principles, right, with an interdisciplinary committee, which is totally what it would take. Can algorithms be made to adhere to that? I think that's a hard question, because not everything can be, algorithms do need a metric, right? It has to be quantifiable. So to the extent that we can quantify things appropriately, and if this committee can agree on what that notion is, it can be incorporated in algorithms. Otherwise, it's going to be hard. But what I would say is very often I think about maybe it's not the model that has to necessarily be adhering to all those principles. It's the process in which we use the model, right? So you may not be able to establish trust in a model because models are always going to have failures, but you can establish trust in the pipeline, the way the model was developed, the way it's been used. And I think that's a better framing to try to aim for, rather than saying, will my model adhere to some principles?
So what you're talking about is almost like a use case setting, that how it's being used, defining
Development and use case.
Development and use case setting. So, which also means that we have to sort of think about, equity by design, right? That design has to be, representative. Like yesterday, our friends from Ascension were presenting about, their work in healthcare, and they think about, there's big gaps in access, big gaps in, access of patients to the healthcare system, access of, big gaps in deployment, who you deploy to, absence of data within the population that you're building it to. even a significant gap in the demographic mix of the physicians and healthcare professionals that the patients are seeing. So it's a lot of complexity from that perspective as a societal norm that has become now. So walk me through like some of your thinking about, so how do we achieve, and I do believe that data, machines, and everything, and all the work that you do could be quite responsive to this. How do we achieve an equity by design? Like what could a well-designed, thought through AI system help us overcome some versus accepting what's almost, what's a normative construct in society, but saying, no, we can help get better at it. We can help improve I was talking to Frank yesterday about the data and how the different clinical trials that could be done, which are much more representative, et cetera. So walk me through as to what you think how design could lead to more equity as well.
Right. So I think the key ingredient to this is the engagement of the stakeholder throughout the pipeline, something I mentioned before. Right? You really have to talk to the stakeholders, and that group has to be representative, right? So it's important to make sure that you're reaching out to a diverse in every possible way, right? I think the mistake we very often do is we define diversity very narrowly, and that leads us into trouble, disagreements, right? So it could be geographic diversity, right? It could be rural versus urban, right? And you really have to think very broadly and ensure that you have all the stakeholders and engage with them throughout the pipeline, right? Making sure first, should AI even be used? Get an answer to that problem. Where should you try to use it? Very often the use case you start with does not end up the use case that we actually implement, right? It undergoes, it always happens. What is the data we are using? Is that representative? What are the assumptions we are baking into the algorithm? And so all of these are design principles we can follow while developing the AI, right? And eliciting those, again, even if you have to get to metrics, elicit those metrics from people, from stakeholders. So I'll give you an example of that. For example, social welfare functions have existed in the social science literature for a while, economics also, but were not used by AI researchers as much, right? And even if you use them, you just like make up some metrics and then try to equalize them, right? As opposed to that, you can actually learn it from data. You can look at people's past decisions, and you can try to learn those metrics. What did they use when they made decisions? And then try to incorporate that. So that's just an example, but I think really that engagement through every step is the key, including, of course, the evaluation, post-hoc, and refinement.
Excellent. So let's say we do all that, and then Father Benanti, one of the points you hit, even with the autonomous cars, was trust. And I still remember last time when you were here, we were together in my Tesla, and he asked me a question. Do you own this car? I said, I remember writing the check. I own the car. He said, do you, or do you only own the tin box, or aluminum box, whatever you called it at that time? I said, no, I own the car. He said, who decides your software functions? Who decides your experience in the car because it's run by software, right? There is no engine. It's basically the software. You get an upgrade and you go, thank you, Elon Musk, and you say, I will do it. This is what you're telling me I should drive the car today? I'll drive it like that. I have Grok in my car. I have an AI assistant now in my car too. So he essentially said, you don't own it. You're just a subscriber to the wishes of a software firm on how that experience should change. And I felt horrible that day, Father Benanti. I was painfully thinking about, and then he also, you made and then we had a follow-on conversation the next time you came as well, where you said, we need, and I've been thinking about it, we have to finish writing that paper, the Department of Software Studies, because we need to study, it's not just computer science anymore, we need to study the deployment, development of software. We need to study software as a being, and in fact, I was talking to Sriram yesterday, and he was also talking about similar perspectives too, on what does being a software mean. So as we have these system and autonomous cars and everything else, one big question is, you've talked about, should they take over, or does it, I have tried to do a proposal writing while using self-driving car, trust me, and I was kicked out of self-driving car. I was banned for months. So don't do that. It's not safe. But you got a proposal done, so it's good. So how would you sort of think about trust in these uncertain machines?
Well, first of all, that kind of observation was before Elon Musk go in politics. So it's
Yes, it was 2 years ago.
2 years ago, in a undapped moment, yes. Well, beside that, we are facing a radical transformation of society, that usually was defined on, let me say, hardware and not on software. And a lot of things that we are talking today is due to this kind of transformation. The software is eating the world. Try to think what does it mean in a regulatory perspective, I was part of this couple of bodies that work on regulation. Well, if you have to define, for example, a knife is a piece of metal, and you can say in an airport, a knife cannot enter. A gun cannot enter in an airport. It's easy to regulate. Yes, no, maybe. Okay? Well, but if we have a software-defined entity, like a car, let's go to Chinese cars, just to not talk about Elon. Well, we in Europe, we have a lot of Chinese car, BYD. Well, no one is guaranteed to us that tomorrow, with an autonomous software update, they can become a bomb. They simply start to burn the battery. That could be a security issue, or they can steal the conversation of the people inside the car, things like that. So the problem is, in which way you will regulate an object that can change the nature with a software upgrade? And that is something that is struggling on society. We are talking, this topic could be an underpoint, a sub-point of this. If we change the nature of the object in a non-stable way, how could a traditional stable legislation be applied to the new nature of this object? In United States, I make my PhD in Georgetown, in bioethics, you need a license to touch the body of someone. If you make the nails, you need a license. If you are a surgeon, you need a license. Well, we could have a series of software-defined objects that can touch the body of people without any license. Or in which way you can have a license for such kind of object? Well, this kind of questioning cannot simply remain in a discussion among user and producer. Because the nature of the object is so flexible, is so changeable. And here is where we need a new sort of guardrails that has to define a sort of constitutional beings of the object. So should we imagine a sort of hard guardrail that do not allow such kind of object to become other kind or class of object? Because this is new, and especially with the most fragile part of population, that could be terrible. Imagine a chatbot that was made for fun and interaction can become the best pushing to suicide for a young, fragile adult. So those are issues that not depending on the developer, that are not depending on the employer, but they depend on the complexity of reality. So for a complex reality, we need a complex thinking. And this is the best bet on university, like the one where we are. Those are the places where complexity can live and exist and be offered to society. It's a new season with a lot of questions, but it's a wonderful time to be a professor in this kind. We have something to talk about and paper to write together.
Absolutely, and very well said, right? Because this is where the universities, because we can form, what are the universities very good at is forming interdisciplinary task forces and working group, right? For everything, we form a task force. So maybe we need to form like one that, because there is different perceptions. We can bring in the stakeholders, and in fact, yesterday, our friends from Accenture and Telstra were talking about, even from a business perspective, I think, and they align with some of our discussions here. From the business perspective, what you're talking is, what does it mean for the business to begin with? Then let's go and do AI. At the Lucy Family Institute, where we have an R.I.S.E program, NSF-funded program on interdisciplinary training for ethical data scientists, and our undergraduates as sophomores, they interview the stakeholders first. They don't start writing code, right? write the problem statement, think about, and then second chapter is think about the ethical guardrails that you may be, you may have to worry about, and then you start writing code. So we could do all that, right? And then yes, it's a new season, a new chapter. How do we like scale it? How do we make this not just a conversation that universities like Notre Dame, can lead, and the right places to have these conversations, or R.I.S.E. or Carnegie Mellon? How are with what we are seeing with all the AI systems today, and we had our friends from we are the first dedicated to Latin America, and what does AI mean in Latin America? That data isn't represented. The voices are not in the data. The voices are not in the model. The developers have no idea, in building these things. Like, so what do we do? How do we, we are at the R.I.S.E AI conference, responsible, inclusive, safe, and ethical AI conference. We've touched on safety, we've touched on ethics, we've touched on responsibility, what we do. But how do we ensure inclusivity in the data before the developers write a line of code for the algorithm? I'll start with you, Aarti.
Okay, so I would say that, first, you're asking specifically about inclusivity of data.
Yes.
Right?
Because, we can, and what I'm getting to is that we can, I agree with both of you, right? I think it's an important goal, something that we should be talking about. Universities are well situated to do. But how do we ensure that even as a university, like today, we have every continent here, every continent a commercial aircraft can go to, right? Represented here. So this is great. How do we sort of scale? Like, how do we make sure that I have friends from Chile, they always say there's Spanish and there's Chileanism, right? Only they know, they understand what they're saying, although it sounds Spanish. So it's their problem. They have to fix it. They are ruining the LLMs, by the way. No, yes, thank you. But that inclusivity isn't there. So how do we get that inclusivity of voice, the data, the research, people, to help us frame the developer mindset, to help us frame the deployment mindset, and something that Father Benanti, you said that is, at some point the deployers are also not, could be confused.
So I would say that it is really about awareness and training, to me, which is, and many times, and to the question of scaling it up, right? How do you do that, right? So you can start at every level, right? First of all, really thinking of it as starting at the elementary or school level, right? Going up through, you can talk about education like community colleges, undergraduate, graduate, but also workforce upskilling and retraining. Just the idea about AI awareness, what's hype and what's, right, actually like really concerning issues, we can only identify even as like, and I should include actually outreach to public as well, right? And we really have to do it across, I think, all the levels so that people start having a mindset which says, oh, if I'm using AI, whether I'm developing or not, even if I'm just using it, right? Do I know what are the right questions to ask? And at least that's the approach I think we have been taking in our institute, to really think through this vertical and think about like, what are we doing in terms of raising public awareness? So we partner with like our, several libraries to be able to do that. We are doing that with high school educators. So one question, 2 years question about scaling up. Initially we thought, well, maybe we should have, we actually are developing curriculum for like high schools on AI and society. What's the best way to convey it that's scalable? And initial idea about like training the school students actually is not as scalable. So we instead came up with high school educator workshop. Let's train the educators who can then, they know how best to talk to their constituents, right? So we run this workshop every summer. We can only accommodate 50 each summer, but we usually get many more applications. But those are 50 educators all across the US, and we run it every year. And now they are starting to conduct their own workshops, right? That's the way to scale it up, where you initiate something, you provide them with the tools, and it's not that we develop the content and we say, here, go use it. It's really co-developed in these workshops. As an example, I was telling somebody earlier, we got several participants in the first round from tribal schools. We did not know how to create content for them. that would really appeal. But these educators actually got involved and then created content that would suit they came up with like a module on classification of fake Navajo jewelry, right? So that's an example where we could not have done it, but we ran a workshop, they co-designed stuff that works for them, and now they can take and like propagate it further. And that's just like one, again, group, but like that happens to many other groups. There are other folks coming from different, again, rural backgrounds, other backgrounds, and they really know how to adapt the stuff. So I think that, to your scalability question, that's my answer, that you train the trainers and then enable them to train others is one good way of doing it, but has to be done across all levels.
Your deployment layer is other trainers who then become developers. So it's like a virtuous cycle.
In a way, yes. Yeah.
Benanti.
Well, let's start from the philosophical problem. What is a piece of data? It's something from reality that you simply make a judgment distinguished from noise. You know, if we have a piezo, in some way sensor, the piezo is transforming in signal something that is important for us in the reality and could be the pressure or could be something else. So every time that we talk about data, epistemologically speaking, we decide that something else is noise. And the problem here, what of the human trait could be defined as a noise or secondary or not important from the process? To this, there is another secondary philosophical problem, and the secondary philosophical problem is that sometimes a new brilliant software engineer can use noise to extract more information. There was a really fancy experiment that was made 3 or 4 years ago in which something that is noise, the images in Google Street View that are not connected to the address, was used by researchers to simply have an inference on the vote intention of a neighbor. Because if you capture some kind of cars, if you capture something that is noise, if you need to navigate, actually it becomes a piece of information in another channel. And this is interesting, you know, because we are facing something that you cannot define this is data forever in this world. Such kind of noise can become data tomorrow. Well, this is the first philosophical layer that probably need to be more reflected and put also with epistemology in the pipeline of production of these tools. And this is part of the answer. The second part of the answer comes from the other standard in engineer, you know. If you buy an hydraulic pump, in which way you know if that kind of hydraulic pump is good or bad for your circuit? Because with the hydraulic pump, you have something that is a data sheet that say the limitation of this piece of equipment and his ability to do things. Well, and because the model that we train on piece of data include some kind of limitation connected to the quality of data, and there is a lot of mathematical theorems that say that the answer is coherent or not coherent to the data according to the sampling of data, it's time probably to have some kind of transparency on data sheets connected to data sets. And this is something that is not on certification of the producer of the algorithm, but it's something that simple relay in the transparency in the process. You know, to obtain such kind of tools, we use such kind of data sets that allow people to understand if this kind of tools is able or not able to be adopted inside a system. May I make an exemplification with a joke, you know? Supposing that you make a classifier to define if something is a cat or not a cat. You take a lot of picture and you have to say yes or not, 1 or 0, to cat or not cat. And you can have, you know, a lot of different cats. At one point, you have a pet of a tiger. Technically speaking, is a felon. Is it a cat or not a cat? According to the people that label it, it could become a cat or not a cat. Now, imagine that it become a cat. If I'm using that API to make a fancy app for my phone, let me tell you if you can touch this pet. And a tiger become a cat. It's better if I get well insured, you know? Well, so this is why no one knows this kind of level that we call base truth. And the base truth is connected to the trustability and reliability of the system in the real life. So we need some kind of window here, glass window, that allow the people that are involved in the production, the different developer, deployer, and probably also some kind of user, to be aware of the limitation of the system. And it's a long journey to do that do not push ourselves in the direction of regulation, but in the direction of standards.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's not about doing all this to craft new regulations, but rather doing this to think about what standards, guidelines, principles could be, and it is a long journey, as both of them have talked about, all the way from as we have to scale it, we have to think about data, what does data mean, what does education mean, training the trainers, how do we sort of bring the world together? So it is, but at the same time, it's a very hopeful place to be at. Because if we collectively can start to think about these issues, form our interdisciplinary committees all across the world to tackle these issues, we would get it right. Because the eclectic group of individuals like this, if we can gather like this at different places globally, we could begin to make a change. And whether what we're doing at Notre Dame or Carnegie Mellon or at R.I.S.E. and the conversations that Father Benanti is having with the Vatican. With that, I can keep talking to these friends of mine, and I would ignore that. I wouldn't even think that any one of you are here. Right? But that will not be good accountability to you. So please ask questions. Thank you. And see, they remembered first in, first out, so.
Great. Good morning. So, Father, this question is for you. So, I am a Catholic graduate of this university and have clients where I talk about AI all the time. My sense of moral responsibility and accountability is tremendous. We get all sorts of training on the technology, the algorithms, stakeholders, this and that. What questions should I be asking as a Catholic in the forums that I participate in? And then also, how do I get ready for that? Because it's true that, we have our teachings, and how do I make sure that is front and center as we have discussions like this?
Well, I think that, and this is something that I'm proposing to Natesh to work on, we can develop a sort of, when you go to an emergency room, you have a series of doctors that has to question you things to understand what is the diagnosis, because usually 99% of time, and the difference is an error of measure, when you go to the emergency room, you say, I'm feeling bad. But that has to become a label that is a diagnosis to have a cure. Well, what the doctor are used to do is a best practice that is called triage. Should we put in place an ethical triage to allow, during this building process of value with AI, a clear view of the ethical points that are on the table? And that has not to be Catholic, has to be general, for the good, AI for good. So we can develop, and I think that this is something that we can work, especially if we come from ND Notre Dame, could be interesting, an ER, ethical triage for deploying AI. And I think that could be really workable, really scalable, and do not work in the direction of certification, but work in the direction of producing an awareness on unwanted consequence that no one would like to have in their own product, because their own product will be their face, and face mean values, mean a lot of things. So that could be a workable way that allow you to not be responsible on the effect, but allow you to give them the ability and the instruments to understand the complexity of the solution that they are putting in place.
Can I ask a follow-up quick? Just wondering, so if are there lessons to be taken from ethical triaging for doctors that could be applied here?
Yes, I think it's the long history of bioethics here. in which you have a different capabilities of the patients. And according to the different capabilities of the patients, the kind of question that you can put in place can really change the real power that you give to the patients to be the real player of his own therapy, you know? And this is where the complexity and the cultural things that you talked before come in place, you know? Try to think with the minors. The ability of minors of giving you answer, or a really young child that is not able to express something, or if you have a dementia patient, someone that is, so you can have a non-competent client that is looking for a solution but is not competent on describing what is under the hood. So there is a lot of literature on that we can in some way metaphorically use to make it much more complex and much more sophisticated, including, we can imagine to develop some kind of advocacy group that bring voices where there is not competencies for people that are involved in such kind of things. So if you are asking to a philosopher to make it complex, yes, I can do it.
Marco, one each.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you. Oh, no, you're good. Thank you, all of you. Definitely, you've given us a lot to think about. I definitely have a lot of, processing going on in my head. So hopefully I can articulate this question correctly. So we talked a lot about, how values can, vary from individual to individual. And we talked about, inclusivity in data and all that kind of thing. So one thing I was thinking about, so at a conference like this, right, and really this applies to any conference, conferences are generally attended by people who care about the subject, right? Same thing would be like if you had an orthopedic conference, it would largely be attended by orthopedic surgeons because they're the ones who are, interested and experts in that field. So my question is, how do we, take what we are kind of discussing here and how do we bring in others who might be in, positions of influence that maybe don't have the same values or haven't thought about this before? So how do we bring people in? And I know we talked about, the younger generation, and incorporating this from the ground up, but obviously there's, people who are already, well educated and out in various different positions. And, AI is something where, it's scaling very, very rapidly and we need to kind of act now. We don't, across a lot of talks, we've seen people saying constantly this is the time to kind of get it right. So how do we, I guess the question, to sum it up, is how do we bring others in to this, and align with them, and how do we do it quickly? Easy question, I know. So.
Yeah, I think first advocacy definitely plays a big role. And actually, this is something I feel like we do not do enough of as academics, right? Including as professors, right? We never used to go down to Washington, D.C. to talk to senators, right? And we are doing more of that now. We should all be doing more of that now. But also training our students to do that, right? So if you take an average student in computer science, clearly at Carnegie Mellon, but even at other places, they do not think about the impact of their research, right? They just think about, here's the delta I'm trying to improve on, and giving them the soft skills, right? That you should be able to talk to your grandma, to the person who comes to maybe does some work for you in your house, or even to people who are in more influential positions, as you were saying, go down. So there are many programs being started now that are encouraging from the student level, but of course also faculty, academia to go out there and talk. We had several Hill events, AI Hill events, where we went and talked to the senators and so on about it. But I think the importance of doing that now is really crucial, and we should step up to the game.
Yeah, maybe a couple of questions. So Marco, let's get to you.
Yeah, one quick question. So it's not actually a quick question. So now we're in the time when AI is producing new knowledge, right? The appearance of these autonomous AI scientists, right? Which produce new knowledge, which pretty much is yet unknown to humans, right? We can see this in computer science, chemistry, biochemistry, and so on, right? So this is changing the landscape a lot, right? Mostly what we've been discussing now, it's the existing knowledge and how to steer it in ethical way and so on. But now the new knowledge is appearing, right? And it's kind of this, even science is democratizing in that way, right? For a cost of maybe a few dollars, right? $5, let's say, you can produce a paper which likely has an innovation which was not seen yet, right? And this is only now. This was not 1 year ago. Today we have this. You can only imagine what this will be in a year or two, right? Could you put this, well, appearance of this automated AI science into the discussion which we had so far, right? Because now imagine agents, right? Which at the moment agents are, okay, pieces of software. Okay, we call them agents. They have a little bit of a protocol and so on. But now the appearance of this kind of self-improving, recursive, adapting agents, right? Which on the way can produce even knowledge which we are not even aware of yet, right? Where does this lead us, right? So this, and this is not, the way how things go fast, right? So while we talk, this is happening, right? So could you put this in a perspective?
Well, it's not an easy question because, again, it depends where we apply it. But I think we learned something in drug discovery, It's looked like AI should produce a new shockwave of drugs that can help a lot of pathology. But not one drugs still exist. So the theoretical side of your question and the practical side of your question seem not reconciliated.
But can you put this 1 year or 2 years
Well,
ahead?
yeah, but it's a problem because, you need also know how to transform such kind of knowledge in a production process, in drug discovery. Yeah? So this is where, the dream of the first moment become a more complex things. Maybe next January, the first drugs come to trial, but there's a delay of 5 years. And we was imagining at tomorrow things. So it's a problem, could be a problem. But the problem is how to make this kind of capability able to work with a research and discovery function that usually was connected to the human beings. Also for example, IP law. Who will be the owners of such kind of discovery? And who could in some way have a patent on it? So there are a lot of practical questions that is much more not on the system. Okay, if you would like to produce paper, is a different thing. But if you would like to produce real things, we need to adjust the society to be able to do that. And what we saw until now, there is no way to have a patent on something produced by a machine. So this is in some way challenging. It's challenging like the software-defined reality that we talked before. It's challenging the society. I don't have a clear perspective on that. But, I see that there is some delusion on drug discovery.
If it's a quick question, we'll take it. If not, I'll invite you to talk to them offline.
It can be a high-level question.
Okay.
So my question is surrounding, we've been discussing AI models, accuracy of output, and sort of the direct impact of the outputs of AI. I wanted to understand more your ethical perspective around the AI ecosystem, including data centers that are being built in communities and have an impact on the environment, data acquisition within the public sphere. So just sort of understanding not just the models themselves, but the impact of AI as an entire ecosystem that is going to be developing over time here.
30 seconds each of you.
So first, yes, I think people are starting to pay attention to that. But again, I think advocacy and even like speaking up on part of the public, getting involved in, if they are holding town halls and so on, like expressing your opinions about it, I think is really crucial. And yeah, that's my 30 seconds or less than that.
Well, in 30 seconds, the new data center of Meta will simple cut off of the grid the Clinton, Illinois nuclear power plant, and all the energy we drove to this kind of a data center. That means that we are challenging social things that has not only one solution, but has multiple solutions. That is about how we should understand the data center and computational power. Because we are used to describe the social contract as something that happen around the infrastructure, water pipe, energy, telecommunication. Now, is a data center a super user of such kind of infrastructure or should be part of such kind of infrastructure? In 30 seconds, I cannot do nothing more than questioning.
Thank you all very much. Please let us thank both of them. Thank you.